So this is where we left off, and I was starting to put together the mast. Now I knew that the masts were needing to be, they were going to have to hold up a lot of weight relative to the rest of the boat, and they were going to need to not move once we put them in place. So in the advantage of the construction of doing all these separate pieces inside, you can see that I was able to take squares and essentially use the dowel that I had, which is essentially just, I bought two kinds. I bought two kinds. I think I got these at Walmart, if I'm not mistaken. But I got bigger and not so big. And I realized that foam is so forgiving in its nature. Let me just grab a piece out of my offcuts. I can find a piece in here. Yeah, here we go. That you can take a piece of foam and you can use a dowel to generate a hole, or at the very least generate that. You can see that. That is a pretty darn crisp hole in the back of this. And I think, actually, if I remember correctly, I think I went all the way through. Yeah, boom. And now there's a hole in here without using a knife. Just using the object by rotating it back and forth, because it's well defined. You can rotate it back and forth, and now you've created a perfect hole for that object. So basically I created squares that were the same size as the openings to where the mast needed to go. Here, I then decided where I wanted the mast to be, and I perforated that piece, and I replicated that piece to completely fill up that entire cavity. And then, so I made one or two that was that big up here, and then smaller ones down in this cavity here, to give this an actual place for it to go. Let me show you the finished boat. Well, not finished, but let me show you the boat as it is currently. And you can kind of see that down in there, there is essentially a slot for the mast. Now, I was unsure whether that was going to be sufficient, so I actually took two tongue depressors, drilled holes for the size of that, and glued those up here. But that entire cavity, you can kind of see all the way down, is a complete cylinder cavity that the mast goes down into. So, without using any other mechanism other than friction, I was able to make it so that this mast will stay in place and stay well oriented so far, based on what I have so far. So that was me working out the masts. There you can see another picture of it there, and then there's the second one. So this was exciting for me, because now what I had in my head was actually in front of me for the first time. That the hull was in 3D space. In reality, the masts were actually set up for real on the boat, and I could see it. I mean, I could actually see it. I could see what my finished product was going to look like in its scale. And I was, at this point, I was super excited about that. Also, plus I was watching my team beat the Indianapolis Colts at the same time. So it really, this was, to me, super exciting, because you want to give yourself these points of joy in the construction, so you can say, gosh, look what I've done so far. Look at what I've created so far. This is pretty amazing. It will inspire you to keep going. So again, I then had to cut the deck. I don't know if I should have a picture of the deck. I had to cut the deck, cut holes in the deck. That was nerve-wracking, because that's a finished piece. So if you make a mistake there, then you really got problems. And I kind of got off a little bit. There you can see the smaller pieces that had to go down in there to stack. And then at the second one, you have to make sure you try to get it right with the first one, so that it looks right. And again, I'm just working through that process to get it right. And there's a picture of me cutting the holes in the deck, and committing to those holes, because if I got it wrong, I'd have to redo the entire deck piece, and then get it there. So at this moment, I have a completed hull rough construction. I have the masts located, rough construction. I have them oriented, and it looks pretty great as is, as an object. I was very proud of what I was able to accomplish for my very first time ever doing anything like this on almost all of these techniques. So you can do this too. It doesn't, again, I've never done this before. You can do this too. So this is me working on masts. So masts, again, was another exercise in not getting upset when I made mistakes. So I knew that what I wanted it to be, because I knew of the type of Chinese junk riggings, those type of riggings that are used, and used now actually in modern ships, because they're very efficient in the way that they capture the wind and produce propulsion for the sailing ship. So this was me just kind of laying out those sticks and just to see what they would look like. So I also decided that I want to go ahead and make a base for the model. So I made a base for the model. I kind of went back and forth between the sails and the boat and the sails and the boat, because I wanted to give myself some variety in construction. So this was me making the back of the boat. And again, going back to some of these pictures that I have, on the back of the boat, there are these decks on the back of the boat that actually hang off the side. Here's one here. You can see it kind of hangs off the side. Hangs off the side. I don't know if I have a good one of the back in front of me. Let's see. Oh, here's a good one. Again, this all hangs off the back of the boat. So there's this structure, this superstructure in the back of the ship that essentially hangs off the side and is wider than the actual hull itself. And I said, how can I make that simple enough and yet sturdy enough that those pieces won't break? Because again, it's still foam. It's representative of this massive structure that people stand on and possibly have a ballista or something else on, so it has to not break. So I made the piece in the center. This piece here, I made that one piece. I glued that one piece in. I made this strip, I glued that piece in. I made this strip and I glued that piece in. Then I took foam pieces and I actually made this shape and then shaved the bottom of it and then glued it on as the separate wings and mated it up. So this is not one single piece, because it'd be, again, when you have these multiple curves and these multiple cuts like this, these negative space, it's best to take it one shape at a time and make that one right, and then add on stuff rather than trying to do it all at one piece, because it would be very difficult to do. And that way, because you've got a compound curve this way, you got a different curve on the inside, it would be impossible to get this, that you can get it 100% perfectly in there in one single piece. This is much easier. Plus, if you make a mistake on this, you don't have to replace the whole thing. So that's me working on the top deck. That's me working. Now, I knew I needed to support it from the bottom, just like in the pictures. So I went ahead and made these kind of flying buttress kind of things that were swept back. And so I could add some lines of grain to that to give it some even more sweptness. They kind of don't touch the boat except for the one point here and then the top. So it's kind of like a table leg that kind of holds the table that way, which I thought looked pretty cool. Again, it's me watching football again. Here's me working on the front piece, because I knew that most of these boats had a front section that extended out, and that made the boat even longer. So this is me making that piece, and then the supports underneath, and the front supports of that piece. Again, I just drew it by hand because I didn't know what it was going to be or what it's supposed to look like, so I just kind of drew it as best I could. This is me gluing up, again, making the second deck here, and then gluing that in, taking that piece and just drawing it, and then gluing it in, getting rid of the glue, and then making another chiral piece for the other side. And again, because of those angles back, triangles and angles, things like that are swept forward in the bottom and swept back in the top, gives it some energy and some motion, even if it's not moving. It also worked out that the piece wrapped around the bottom deck, which I thought was kind of cool, how this flowed into it, and it flowed over top, and this flowed over top, and that flowed over top. So it all looked cohesive, and it kind of looked futuristic without being, I mean, I'm a big Star Wars fan, Star Trek fan, I'm a big sci-fi fan anyway, so there's a lot of spaceship mentality in this design exercise that isn't done ahead of time. I'm just doing it, I'm just building it as it comes. But it was actually, it looks cool. I mean, it's just basically whether it was correct for this type of boat or not. To me, it just looked cool. I mean, this is where I'm at so far with the third one on. So you have these pieces in here, right in here, that just look cool. And so don't worry about whether what you're building is accurate or correct or perfect or whatever. Don't worry about that. Just make your boat. Again, you look at how I did those side pieces like that. It worked out that when I did that, when I did them, the middle one stopped right here. And then the other one underneath was able to come down and all the way around to this one. And then this one was able to go inside and inside. Again, there was no design inspiration for that. That's what the piece gave me. That's what I was able to see in the pieces I was doing. And it said, okay, I can make that one strip go all the way through, all the way through, all the way through, and come all the way to the backside here, to give it even more kind of overlap. I think anytime you can overlap straight lines with curved lines, it's creating motion for the eye that kind of gives it a sense of moving even when it's not. Again, even the shape of this roofing here, I did it in such a way that even though it's probably not accurate for a boat, it just looks a little more futuristic in that way, and it gives the boat a feeling of actually moving when it's really not. Don't look at that. I put too much paint on there. I just did that last night, actually. I'm just kind of working on the graining and the highlighting now, so it's not nearly where I want it to be, but it's actually got some look to it. I like the blue. Just a sidebar. Blue is like my favorite color, and I've decided that blue is going to permeate a lot of the geographical area in which this is all happening, which is the Westgate area. And so I'm integrating a lot of blues in here. I'm also a Ford guy, so I love that light blue. So I'm introducing that as the decorative part of what these people would have done with this particular ship to signify that it's a particular fleet, which is the blues. And so the other thing that I did that I don't know if I showed in the pictures, let me see if it's in the pictures or not. I don't know. Oh, this is Captain Jack. Because I don't have minis, so I have to make my own minis. So I have Fred 1.0. You probably saw him in the Oubliette build. This is Jack, Captain Jack. So it basically took a 1-inch square of foam and took another thing and drew a guy on him, just so I can see how this is going to play out. I don't know where Jack is. If you don't have the ability to do that, you can always use an iPhone charger like this, because this is a 1-inch square. And it's about a little bit taller than 1 inch here. So this would be representative of the tallest possible mini that you would have at 28 millimeter scale, to give you an idea of how much space you actually have that you can actually put. So in looking at this, I feel I can get 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10, 11, 12, 13, 14, 15, maybe 16 minis if I wanted to, of this size on the top of this play surface. And remember that the masts are here. So in gauging how big you want to make your model, I knew that I needed it to be big enough to be able to have at least 6 of these on here, plus some others. So again, you can see that the boat itself, the actual hull is, let's see if I can get the shape. I got my hand on, the hull itself is almost exactly 12 inches from this spot to this spot. It's warped because of the way the angle on the camera is, but it's 12, a little more than 12. And then you have an extra 2.5 here and probably an extra 3 here. So you got about 14, 15 this way, based on what I've done to give it some length and give it some more, I wasn't going to add this. As you can see in the picture, I kind of thought I was going to stop. But I felt like, okay, I have the ability to add another deck at the back. And perhaps they had some kind of additional weapon here, so I can have a guy standing here and a guy standing here and a weapon of some kind of ballista or something. Because the more spaces that you have, also what ended up happening when I made that was I had to make a support for it. So that ended up kind of finishing out the profile of the ship by making this support for this platform straight down the back. that's going to match up with when I eventually get the rudder for the ship. So that made a nice finish out on this edge, and I'm going to make two finial designs for this with the A and the C from the name of my company to go on the back of this like this. So it worked out. What I'm doing in the picture is I'm creating the hole for where this is going to go for this detail. So in creating that, I knew that I needed to have the ability for them to get below deck, because that's how typically the ships of this size, and to scale, this ship is about 100 feet long to scale, 85, maybe 80, 85 feet long. So it's certainly enough to have at least some kind of a lower deck in its construction. So this is me cutting a piece out, and that's why I used the mini to see how big it needed to be. Cutting the piece out, saving that piece, going in and gouging out everything that was inside that cavity, taking two leftover pieces of foam and making sure they're about that width and shoving them down in there on a diagonal. Not because I wanted them to be a diagonal, because there was no other way to get them down in there, which worked out. That's why this looks the way it looks, is because those gave me that problem. And I'm like, okay, well, I can't fix that, so it's just going to be at an angle, which turned out to be fine. Here's me making stairs going down, just basically 1, 2, 3, 4 pieces of foam cut like that, shoving it down in there with some glue. Again, no one's going to see it. Very few people will ever see it, unless you have like a little microscope camera. This is me shoving the pieces back into place, and you can see the stairs down there. Gluing them in, cutting them off flat. Terrible overexposed photograph. There's the stairs down in there. There you can see that I took that piece that I saved and I shoved it back down in there for the back of the boat, for the back of that staircase. This is me making the shape that's going to go over top. And I knew I wanted something that had kind of a cool swept back look to match the rest of the boat. This is me bending it and forming it and basically molding it in my hands to give it a curve. I made it bigger than the width between the two pieces because I knew that when I made the curve it was going to be now shorter. And also it would hold the curve because it's being glued in place. So this is, again, with the striations on top, they simulate wood grain as well as make it possible for the thing to be molded and curved. And I kind of cut out the sides, and then I glued it onto the two tops. Now it's going to maintain that curve no matter what because it's being held in place. It's being held in place by both of these two side pieces. Easy. I mean, the model gate told me what it wanted, so I had to go with what there was there, and so that's how it ended up looking that way. Now it looks like a combination of some ship off of Star Wars or Star Trek with a Chinese sailing boat. Oh, there was my picture of the example of the back decks that needed to be, and I contemplated railings and the little dinghy off the back, and I said, maybe I'll do that, maybe I won't. Again, I'm not sure if I want to complicate the model too much to make it impossible to play on. And so here's just some pictures of how that finished up. Is it a mast back in? Again, looking at the relationship between the masts and the, I don't know, whatever you call that, the entryway to the lower decks, making sure all that worked together and making sure all that kind of played well visibly. There's Captain Jack in the front of his boat. He's super excited, as you can see. This is me adding in the side pieces here and starting to add those in and create those kind of finished elements. This is me researching ballistas, researching harpoon guns. This is me adding that third panel. Now, what I did differently in the third panel from the first two is I did the grain differently. On these, I did the way I normally do it is with a pen, and then I push down with the pen and make exaggerated grain with the pen. On this one, I did it entirely, other than these planks, I did it entirely with the knife. And I did the whole thing. You might have a good picture of it somewhere here. I did it entirely with, yeah, there's a good picture of it there, with the knife. And I think that grain is to better scale than this grain. I think that if I would do this again, I hope I never have to do this again, but I think I would make all of this grain that way, and it would make the grain more to scale with the rest of the boat and make the boat look even bigger because the grain is so tight, because it just looks good. And again, as you can see, to further accentuate that movement pattern, I took from the center line and then I just made like kind of like sun rays. Everything kind of is out this way rather than straight. I made it out this way to give it that kind of feel. I didn't do as well on this one or this one, but this one I think I got just about right. Here's the back with that tail piece in place. And then again, you can see where I put the other pieces on the side. That's just chipboard from a Lucky Charms box. There's me trimming it down. Then what I did now was I said, okay, this looks good. And if I'm going to paint that blue, I want other places where I can both protect the edges and get blue. So what I did was I ran that same chipboard strips, and I just cut a bunch of strips, and I ran it all over the outside edges of everywhere where there's an exposed edge of foam. Every single place where there's an exposed edge of foam, I ran that here, all the way up here. I ran it here, I ran it here, on the back, on the keel, here. So again, to give it some additional layer of protection from dings on the sides, but also it would be something that when you paint up, it's going to look like trim because it is trim and it's painted, and it gives it that addition. I added them here and then painted them blue, and I thought that really ties this whole theme together well. So that's why I chose to go that route on adding those pieces rather than just being raw foam. It basically, I think, closes out those pieces. It gives them a border, which just to me looked better. Let's see what else. I'll be watching Wrath of Khan, I think, or maybe even Search for Spock. So again, I wrapped them around the front. Here's me finishing them out. So here's where I started to really struggle with slowing down and taking my time. So I have this picture, I have it right here. And this is where because I said, okay, this is the rig I want to use. I want to use this rig on both of my masts. So I knew that this picture was too small. Clearly, this picture is too small. So this boat is 5 inches long and 5 inches high. So I knew that I needed to scale this up. So when basically what I did was I doubled it. Well, that was a mistake because my boat isn't double the size of this. It's bigger than that. It's more than double. So when I did my scaling up this way, I scaled up. So this is about a little less than, and I even wrote on here, 10-inch boat hull scale. I even wrote it on the paper, not realizing that my boat isn't 10 inches. Idiot. So what I did was I went through all this work to make all the different panels and pieces of this sail. And I'll go back to my pictures. Made all these pieces. This sidebar magnet. I did all these pieces and made this, figured out these, figured out this, finished it, then realized it was too small. Because when you take the boat and you put the boat on the sail, it's too small. It's 25% too small for the size of the boat. And in reality, it's not supposed to be that small. So this is my session 0. If anybody wants to buy this, you can buy it, whatever. But I learned how to work this material. I learned how to sew the material up. I deliberately allowed myself to have a contrasting stitching on this so that it had the look of being sewn panels, because that's in fact what it is. But we'll get back to that in a second, because again, I did a lot of work on that piece that I can't use now. So now I'm back here. So I broke off of that And I said, okay, I knew I wanted to do magnets. So I looked online, I studied online, studied how magnets are sold and how they're built, and N40 versus N50 versus N52 versus, oh my gosh, I know way too much about magnets now. So eventually I settled in on some N40s that I could get at Home Depot rather than waiting 6 weeks through Amazon in COVID to get a delivery of these teeny tiny little things. These, even though they're not N, the higher the N number, the stronger they are. But I knew that I was going to use more than just one. I was going to use like 6 or 7. So I said, okay, I can live with that. They're tiny. They're super teeny tiny. As you can see in the picture, what you see is 150 magnets in this photograph compared to a quarter. That's how small they are. So I said to myself, okay, how am I going to make an indentation the right size for these magnets? Well, I said, okay, let me take the top of a pen off and jam that pen down in the foam like I did with the big doll, and it was perfect. It was the thing fit perfectly in there. So I just basically made registration marks. I put them in there. I then glued them in. I then put a bunch of extra heavy layer of Sharpie on the top of it, and then push the other piece down on there, and it transferred to the next piece. So I just worked through that process of making the indentations, putting them on there. At the end, I think I stacked 5 or 6 in the hole on top of the other ones because they were perfectly exactly matched up, and I could make the indentation enough to then do the proper indentation that way. And it works. It's deceptively simple, these freaking magnets. You know, and after you paint it, you can barely notice that they're there. You can barely tell that they're there. Certainly not enough to distract the eye. So now back to sales. So this is me working. This is my material I got at Walmart. I have to go back and find the right store that I bought it from so I can track down the SKU number for it, because a lot of people were asking about it. I chose it over regular fabric because it has some, number one, it has a great texture to it. And number two, it has, because it has a coating on one side. I wish I have a scrap piece. It has the texture on one side, but it has, let me flip this over so you can see. It has a coating on one side. I'm sorry, texture on one side, but a flat coating on the other. And I didn't want that to show because that didn't look right. So I knew I needed to sew 2 pieces together, which was fine because I was intending to do this stitching anyways. And it gave it a finished look on both sides. It gave it some rigidity and some thickness to it that it would not flop. It would kind of stay in its spot where it needed to. But it did present some challenges because this grain or this pattern is in a hex, or is in a grid. So I had to decide how I was going to do that. So basically I made sure I cut the pieces, if you can see, that the bottom of the piece is correct, and then the top angle is whatever it is. And then this piece, the grid is correct, and then the top of it's whatever it's going to be, and so on and so forth, because that's kind of how the panels were cut originally when they were building these ships. The other thing I did wrong on this one is I sewed the wrong side, because these edges here should really be on the bottom. So I boogered this up a couple of different ways. So that's why I chose that material, because of its properties in that respect. I just really liked the way it looked. I love the blue, and I thought it had a great look to it, and it was very outspoken in its presentation. This hemp cord that I bought it with the multiple colors because I figured that the different lines on the ship were actually different colors. So I allowed myself the opportunity to have some variety in that way, so that all the lines weren't identical. And this was only a couple dollars to get it that way. and I bought a couple of these. So again, here's me transferring the pattern. Here's me learning how to sew this on a sewing machine and getting a super tight stitch and sewing two pieces together. Again, trial and error, going slow, learning as you go, cutting it. I was at this point, I was stoked about the way these. I could see it in my head. I could see this as I was doing that. I could see it coming because and then when I laid it down, I was like, oh, this is fantastic. I said, it looks great. And at this point, I still was oblivious to the fact that the thing was way too small. So this is me figuring out the things. And I probably, if I had to do it again, even on the finished one, I might have chosen a slightly thinner dowel for these pieces to give it better scale. But for what I was doing, it's fine. This is me marking how big they really needed to be. I took them to my outside table, planer sander with the spinny thing, sanded down the edges to look like they were the edge of poles or whatever you would call those. And then I took the brown twine here with a fairly thick needle. You can see the needle's right here. And lashed it in on an angle. Lashed it down. It's not glued in at all. It's just lashed by the cord. The cord has multiple knots tying it in. And then I use super glue to super glue the knot together in a completely binded. It's like solid. The knots are completely solid. And then I trim the edges off, mostly. So again, I took it. And at this point, I realized I did it upside down. I should have put the rods on this side. But then I'm like, uh-oh, how am I going to fix this problem? So then I said, all right, let me bring up my template on my screen. And it worked out that my template was at 75%, and it matched up exactly with these correct templates. So all I needed to do was go from 75% to 100%, and it was already 25% bigger. And I was like, I'm trying to figure out the math, and you see me trying to calculate the math and do all the crazy, and I'm like, this is not working. But when I put it on the screen and I went from 75 to 100, it just worked out that visually, in reality, if you put a paper up to the screen, you were making it 25% bigger. And I said, all right, whatever this size is, that's the size I'm going to go for. So I took the piece of paper, I held it up to the computer screen, I traced them out on the computer screen. I made sure that, as you can see, that grid was along the bottom edge of both pieces. Now they're chiral for sure. And they're definitely going to have that going that way. This is me laying out I already can see the difference, a significant, huge difference between one and the other. You could see now I've laid it out on the boat, and you can see even if I use this as a front sail, it's certainly not big enough for a mainsail compared to the one that I was making. So this is me 2.0 on the sewing machine. And as you can see, it's cleaner. My technique is better. My lines are better. All around better second effort than what I did on here. And as it was coming together, I was just so happy. There's nothing more satisfying than seeing a project that involves sewing pieces together that represent something to scale come together, because it's fun. It is a lot of fun because it's literally built in. I couldn't wait to get it off the machine so I can hold it up there and see it side by side. So this is me doing the first true sail. Oh no, this is the old one. This is the new patterns. This is the two. I cut them both out, so now they have two perfectly matched sails. This is me working out an idea I had that I was going to make the mast pivot. So I was going to make the mast with a moving piece like this, and it was going to pivot down. I'm not sure if this is going to work yet, based on what I was trying to accomplish. But this is me. So that's the idea. That's the vision. That's the hope of what I hope it will do. Whether it will do it or not, I don't know. I honestly cannot tell you whether this is going to do it or not. Because that to me looks hot. I think that looks super cool. And again, this is the first time I had both sails in position on the boat, and I can't wait to go faster because I just really want to get it done. So this is me choosing my thread for the sails themselves. And I had to go back and resupply because I didn't have enough of these smaller ones for both of these sails. Now that I already used them for the other, I got myself a backup glue gun. I might have spent $13 with everything you see here. So again, for those who say that this is going to cost a ton of money, it's not. This is me working out the size of the new ribs, or whatever you want to call them. I'm not sure what you're supposed to call them. This is me sewing in the first one, second, third, trimming it out, getting the first one done in comparison to the other sail. Significant difference. This is me figuring out how to deal with rigging, because on a boat it's not just some sails attached to a mast. There's a certain way in which these are done. So I use this picture as my guide, and I knew that in addition to lashing the sail to the mast here, I knew that there was some supports for the bottom end of this that required some kind of what's called block and tackle, basically a wooden pulley. At least these two. I didn't know if I was doing that or not, but it's at least these two. So I said, all right, I got to figure out how to make that a reality. So the first thought I had in trying to stay with dollar store stuff was they had, for $1, a giant pack of these goofy, ugly plastic beads with a mold line in them and everything. I said, all right, if these work, that'll be great because they're the right shape. I did it. I did this mock-up. Not at all happy with what it was. It just didn't look right. It looked like a dollar store bead. Tried to make it look like a pulley. I was not happy with that at all. So that wasn't working for me. It also didn't look to scale. So this is me, and again, me trying it out, trying to get it to, I'm looking at it here. What does it look like there? It still looked like junk. This is me starting to put Mod Podge on the model to start to get it sealed, because I knew that would take time and several coats. I said, all right, let me get some of it on there. I left the part blank by the mast because I knew I was going to still work on that part. This is me getting, now this is me realizing that the Mod Podge caused the side piece to bubble up. It's not so bad now. It's really not as noticeable. Now you can kind of still see it if you actually deliberately looked, but it really is not that bad, and I kind of just left it alone, and it kind of relaxed itself a little bit on its own and came back into form. But again, it's representative and not historically accurate. So there's the base, there's the bottom, and again, this is me working out this deal. Now, so what I thought I could do is I thought for sure that I could take a dowel, which was still about the right size, and I thought I could reshape the size of it to make it less round and make it more oval, and maybe whittle that into it, because the ones I saw online that were scale, that's what they were, is people made these and made 100 of them, and you bought 20 for $15. And I'm like, I already have this, why don't I just do it myself? So this is me trimming it down, shaping it down, making the notch, testing out the notch. That looks, to me, it looks right. Scale-wise, it looked right. So I said, all right, I think I'm onto something here. So I said, all right, I think we can make this work. So then I said, all right, let me turn it the other way and actually put the notch on the edge and then figure out a way where I could cut it off. So I made the notch, I cut it off, and it's so funny how it looks like a piece of Cheerios. And so this was my first prototype, and this is what it turned out to. Let's see if I have it here somewhere. No. Oh, here it is. So again, this is me saying, okay, I think this, even though it's not correct or right, it's still representative. Looks decent. This is me making 5 of them because I felt like I needed 5 more. This is me putting them together, twisting on one side. These are the cheap files I used to make the grooves and whittle it out after I drilled the hole in the center of it. Again, I wouldn't use a knife, too dangerous. I think these little tiny mini files are fine because they're not expensive. This is me figuring out how a mast is lashed, how a sail is lashed to a mast in this rigging. And it's not just decorative, it actually is functional the way this is set up, which is fascinating. And so that's my finished, that was my first one that I made. I then took this blue thread because I wanted to introduce some blue into it. And oh, here's the bad one from Dollar Store. And here's the good one. And I took basically super glue. I super glued this part to each other. And then as it was drying, I held the blue and I just wrapped the blue thread, this little light yarn type thread, I wrapped it around all the way up and all the way down and just re-glued the top part of it. And that made a nice blue binding to that, which I think, although it's probably too big to scale, I don't care. I think it looks cool. And in the picture you can see it looks pretty cool too. So this is me emulating this with this. This is me watching Ac Inc. as I'm putting it together. So now this is these pieces here, which are now going to work out to actually hold the mast in place. And again, this is me kind of following the guidelines of what I saw by picking a spot here and picking a spot further out. I didn't know why at the time why it does that instead of being closer. I picked these based on the drawing and I put that in there, tied it in, and I used a different one. I used this guy here to give it some contrast between this line and this line to give it some contrast. So I used that lighter one for here. And then I put that to see how that needed to be done. So I cinched that up. Where's the other one at? I'll show you that one instead. Let me take all this stuff off of here. So this is exactly what you see on the picture is this. So I tied that in, got this right, tied this in, got this to look right on the sail itself, this here. And you can see in the picture, that's what I'm doing is I'm working that out. I didn't have this top part in yet, but I knew that I needed a certain amount there, and I got these all in. This is me, again, mocking it up and putting it on and seeing how it looks on both sides. Again, this is, again, me getting ready to just do that. This is going back to reinforcing the part where the masts are going to be. These are 2 tongue depressors drilled out with my drill press to the size of the dowel. This is me clamping them together and gluing them together. This is me fitting them in to make sure they're the right size before I glue them in. I shoved a bunch of Mod Podge in there and shoved it in there. That's all it is. I didn't use super glue or hot glue or anything like that, so I just used Mod Podge because it was wedged between the sides into there, and that stayed. It didn't go anywhere. And this is after where it dried. I tested it out, make sure I could still fit the mast still in the hole. These are just more pictures of this. This is a second or third coat of Mod Podge to seal it. It's with the bottom on and the stand. This is, again, mocked up with the 2 masts now that I can mock it up, now that I finished that reinforcement. I'm not sure how I'm going to use these, but I saw them and I thought they were really cool. They are cool, but I don't know if I'm going to use them or not because they're rings. It could be portholes. There could be some rings around the bottom of the mast, maybe a ship's wheel. I haven't used them yet. I haven't decided, but I was there and I grabbed them. And then these hooks, I was thinking that I needed more lines and wires on the ship, and I was going to have to do more rigging, and I was going to terminate them in these little hooks, which are for earrings, so that I could take them off when I'm transforming the ship from sailing to airship. So again, this is after I put the spike into the top, which basically I drilled a hole the same size as I basically took one of these small ones, found a drill bit that was the same size as that, drilled a hole in the end of the big one, straight down. Took this, shoved it down in that with some wood glue, cut it off, and then tapered it. That's how I made the spires on the mast to make them longer. It also, because they were different size, I didn't fully sand it down, so it gave me a lip to have all of these lines attached to and kind of grip to it so they wouldn't slide down the mast. So these are not glued to the mast. This is not glued here. This is all set in. You can see it all moves. It's all set in just from the rigging itself. Holds it all in place. So here's me doing this intertwine with the white. I use the white to again give it a darker, lighter, lighter. And this attached from here to here. So fascinating. This goes around the mast, pulls on this, pulls on the mast, and brings this part, it forces the mast into that position. So if you made a model ship that you wanted actually RC model and you want to do this, this is exactly how you would do it. Because this holds it down and this holds it up in. So basically you now have this collaborative cinching of the mast here, here, and here. And in the drawings it shows that it skips, so I did the same as that just to make it easier for the process. I didn't use any, there was like a pulley in here somewhere, I didn't worry about that. But it holds that thing right exactly where it's supposed to, and it holds the sail in the position where it's supposed to, all through the relationship between these lines and the way that it's rigged. It's fascinating. It was a very fascinating way of kind of learning about how this works. I tied that up to the top, glued, tied it up to the top, glued. Again, it's not glued to the mast, it's separate from the mast, but it's glued as a thing there. And so now that's the finished out piece that I have in these photographs here. Super. Once this started going together, it was amazing how it all pulls together the way it's. I was worried that it was going to come apart, it was going to move around, it was going to look wonky when you try to touch it on the when you're trying to mess with it on the playing surface. It was going to feel delicate, but it's spot on solid. It really is. When I got that first one, I was so excited. I haven't finished out this for the second sail. That's why you don't see it yet. Because I kind of moved forward in the process. So here's both of the masts up with the spires. Again, now you're really starting to see some significant character. This ship has character now. I scraped this whole length. I took it back out in the garage. I scraped it with a jigsaw blade, a fine-toothed jigsaw blade, and I just scraped it with the blade to make this striations. I took it with the spinning front part of the table sander and I kind of ran it across the edge, so it made like this spiral gouge, and it gouged out some of the parts here so it was less regular. And that's what you can see is the lack of regularity in the way that looks, to make it look to scale more rough. Oh, there's a picture of my cat. This is me getting ready to create a template for the back of this here, these two pieces. So I made a template for that I eventually am going to cut on the Cricut machine, just like I did for my windows for the Empty Fish Inn. So I don't know if you watch that video, I designed window frames and pulled it into Cricut, and my daughter cut these out in the Cricut machine to make really cool windows. I don't have them here in front of me, but I'll show them to you in a minute. And I'm going to do the same thing with this. I'm going to make a design. I'm going to make a design on this, and I'll just have the Cricut machine cut it for me. This is me starting to add some color to the boat, to the hull. Oh, there's the ones that were through Cricut. This was me. This was a whole separate video of me testing out glue to make this work, so skip that part. There's a sunset. Here are, again, this is me adding the blue to those strips before I do any washes or anything like that. So it was a super bright, brilliant blue. I did some blue to the top of the mast to give it some cool color. Again, added some browns, added some blues. I knew that I was going to do 2 or 3 different layers of stuff before I settled in what I'm finally doing on this particular project, because I can't leave well enough alone. So these are the 2 masts put together. There's some blue there. Oh, I did some blue on the tips here, on the tips of the thing, so it just seemed like it made sense to do that as a decorative part of the thing. Maybe it seals it from from rain. Maybe it seals it from rot. Maybe it's some type of a ichor or some substance that seals the end of the wood as a functional thing. Who knows? This was my first wash coat wet. Didn't look like this when it dried. Kind of disappointed it didn't, but I guess my formula is just not quite right yet. Again, it looks great wet, but it just dried just too dull. Again, before, after, but again, wet. So the bottom one made some pretty interesting transitions as it was going to, because the base coat I did was a spray paint, and I think it started to eat through the Mod Podge, and then the paint I put on over top started to wash out the black that went over the blue, and so it created some really cool effects, which I don't know that I still have them anymore from my last wash coat, but I really like the way that looks. I think it really, to scale, kind of looks like the bottom of the boat, but it didn't dry that way, because again, that looks like timbers on the bottom of the boat. So these are tables for the Empty Fish Tavern that I'm still working on. That's the bar, actually. There's the sign. And let's see, I thought I had more pictures than that. Oh, is that all? Okay, so that's all the pictures I have. So where we're at so far is we have the sails. Still have to do the rigging on the sails. We have the hull, and this is like my first coat of highlight. I think I'm going to try to bring it back into the browns. I'm not sure about the gray. I think I want the browns to be more prominent, so I'll probably go back over this a couple times. And I redid the blues again. So we have those two. And so where we're at this point is we are going to be working on getting this finished with regards to the way it's going to be finished out. We're going to get the rest of this rig on here. And then at that point, I think the first part of this project will be done. And the second part of the project will begin, which is figuring out how to turn this into an airship. And there's a million ways to do this. A million super duper duper cool ways to do this. And I have not yet started to draw it out, but I know this. That looks cool. And I know that looks freaking cool. And it's chiral, it's twin, just like the whole theme of the whole thing is chiral, where everything is twins and mirror images of things. So between these two, I don't know, what do you think? Which of these do you think you like better? This is obviously much more steampunk. And this is obviously much more, I think this came from drawings for a game, if I'm not mistaken. Some conceptual drawings for a game. But that looks cool. And I could imagine the ship hanging underneath there, either this one or that one, and hanging directly underneath that, and having that part in the center with the smokestack come down on top of the ship here and lock in. So you have this climate controlled cabin on the deck here. It's gonna be fun. So that's where it is. That's where we're at. Not a completed video front to back, but at least gives you really the first half of this project. I'm super excited to see what this thing will do to present me with challenges next. If you have any ideas and thoughts on what I could add, or a good line on how to get a decent 3D model for a ballista or a harpoon gun or something like that, let me know. Drop me a line in the comments below. And so, as always, it's on to the next adventure. See ya.